So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Nestor Rodriguez, CEO and co-founder of Carbon World Health, a local one-stop shop for health, fitness, and beauty. Also a medical director at Watertown Regional Medical Hospital for emergency services and pre-hospital services. And I'm extremely excited to be moderating this panel with very distinguished panelists that I will allow them to introduce themselves. And our topic today is actually one of those important things to actually break barriers, to create change from the top down. The title for it's Pathways to C-Suite. And despite all we've heard about people trying to make changes or promoting diversity within organizations, whether it's an academic center, corporate, nonprofit, the studies still show that diversity kind of gets halted when we talk about a C-suite. And what I mean by a C-suite, so we're all on the same page, is those executive positions or the people that report directly to executive positions. And why is that, right? We see it where at the top, it gets harder and harder and harder. Yet at the same time, we're saying we're making all these interventions to try to improve that. So there's obviously a disconnect there. In addition to that, if you look at the literature, it shows that companies are more productive, they make better financial decisions, they recruit better, their culture is better when there's diversity, but oftentimes diversity stops before it even hits the C-suite. So in today's hour or so, what I want to do, and we talk to the panelists, is kind of provide something for everyone. First, start with the panelists of where were they? Did they see themselves in this position? Because if you don't even see yourself and don't understand what these roles are, how can you get there, in my opinion? Secondly, kind of transition to some of these, what are the skill sets that are needed to enter C-suites or to make yourself a strong candidate to be considered for one? And then finally, hey, they're here. These panelists, honestly, it's a privilege to be amongst them. I got the privilege to be in the C-suite early on, but these guys have made it. Their accomplishment speaks for themselves. And now they're in positions where they can change and affect change. So I'm going to challenge them with different questions so that we kind of learn from all aspects, depending on where you are in terms of who the viewer is watching us. So first, I'd like to start and welcome the panelists. And you guys could take turns, but I'll let you introduce yourselves. And also then just kind of say, when you introduce yourself, obviously your title. And then if you can answer, hey, if you talk to your younger self, would you envision yourself being where you're at, or was this something that changed through time? Errol, do you want to start?
Well, I am Errol Davis. I am a person in what I call in transition right now. I'm moving from who's who to who's he to who cares. And I have been CEO of Alliant Energy based in Madison, Wisconsin. I was CEO for 15 years there, which is an unheard of tenure these days. Then I moved to Georgia to run the university system of Georgia, which is a 35 institution, $6 billion operation there. And then I ran the public school system in Atlanta for a 3-year period. And so I never thought I would do any of these things. And I was listening to you talking about envisioning yourself. I only took the view that I would do my job, do it exceptionally well, and only good things would happen because of that. And because I could not look up and see executives of color, I just never thought that I would move up very high, but I kept moving. And so I hope I was an inspiration to others.
And we'll circle back with some of that along the questions too. So Dan.
So good morning. Good morning, everyone. I just want to thank Henry Sanders and Madison 365 for asking me to be here today. Really appreciate it. I'm humbled by that. And I'm humbled by this tremendous panel here today. So my name is Daniel Brown. I'm the executive manager for Ho-Chunk Gaming Madison. I formerly had managed our flagship casino at Wisconsin Dells in the late 90s and early 2000s. From there, I transitioned into an elected position. I served as the Ho-Chunk Nation's vice president from 2007 to 2011. And more recently, I've been managing the Ho-Chunk Gaming Madison facility, which not to sound immodest, but I've transformed it into the new flagship casino of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And a real brief sort of response to Nestor's question, I guess, for us is like, did I envision, if I was a younger guy, would I kind of see myself in this position? And the answer is an absolute no. My path really is a result of a sense of duty, knowing that, my people, have been here for many millennia, and, we have gone through a lot of challenges from the federal government policies. And I've watched us recover and get better and better all the time. And really all I ever wanted to do was make a contribution to making our people better, raising our standard of living, providing for educational opportunities, and just helping my people. And so really it was not a purposeful thing. I wasn't chasing any dollars, nothing like that. It's always been a sense of duty. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you. And we'll circle back on some of those comments too. Rick, would you like to go?
Thank you, Nestor. And I also want to extend my thanks to Henry for the opportunity to participate in the panel. Nestor, thank you as well, sir, for serving as a moderator and a facilitator for the discussion. So my story is similar to Dan's. So I did not envision myself when I was younger serving as a healthcare executive. And my path was a circuitous one. So I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Both my dad and my brother are physicians. So my dad is an ED doc and retired from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Shout out to the ED docs out there, Nestor. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta and got a degree in philosophy. Because I was interested in it. I was reasonably good at it, but I really didn't know how I was going to pay back loans. So I found myself about to graduate with a degree in philosophy. At the point in time, there was a TV show called LA Law. So I had visions of being like Blair Underwood, who was one of the Black lawyers on LA Law, arguing in court in really nice suits. I did not have a firm grasp of what lawyers did or what law school entailed. I was successful enough. I went to law school, graduated, passed the bar, and I worked as a lawyer for 3 years. And ultimately, I decided that that's not what I wanted to do. So it wasn't until I was probably 27, 28, and had practiced law for several years that I started looking at healthcare administration and this idea that I wanted to be able to pay back loans, use my law degree, and feel useful, like I was giving back to the community, were really kind of the driving concerns. And what I discovered in healthcare administration is that health systems in particular, it's heavily regulated. There's a lot of complexity to academic medical centers. And so some of the training that I got, some of the experiences that I had as a lawyer did end up being transferable. So I went to UAB and did a MBA and a master's in health administration, a coordinated degree program. And I worked part-time as a lawyer in a 3-hospital system while I was going to school to try to stay current with loans and all of those things. And ultimately ended up, working in healthcare. And I've been doing that for the last 20 plus years. So as president for the Madison Region Hospitals, there are 5 hospitals in Dane County. I serve as the regional leader. So there's COOs or CEOs that either have a dotted line or a solid line reporting relationship to me who are running the different hospitals. And that, in essence, is what I do.
Perfect. And welcome again. So I think hopefully that kind of sets the tone to the audience that it's not us just lying like, hey, they're legitimate leaders and they're doing the work, in that. And what we talked about kind of going through this journey, one of the things, and I might look at myself at every phases and kind of take this as I'm asking advice for you and then obviously with the audience. So one of the things, I'm the first one to go to my family, go to high school, go to college. Luckily, I got to go to Yale. And I say luckily in that Yale accepted me, but I worked hard to get there. But when I got there, it was a world that, we all said, hey, did I see myself in these roles? And we all answered no, right? And when I got to Yale, all my counterparts, all my Caucasian students, they're they had that path. They're like, yep, that's what I want to do. Yep, C-suite is my ultimate level. So at that, knowing that, what would you guys say? Why do you think that's the case, right? Why do you guys think, in terms of in your own experiences, why? For me, it was hey, I just didn't have anyone to go. Like, just applying to college was the thing of like, I made it, but I didn't know what the next step. And in medicine, it was a little bit easier for me to follow because it's a pretty step regimen. But C-suite in every other aspect of the world, it is this journey. It's not linear. I mean, it's great. And I try to help people go from A to Z quicker, but oftentimes it's this ups and downs. So what would you guys say from your perspective? And actually, because this is a conference for Color of Men, why do you think that's the case, that we were all like, I didn't even think I could get there. I didn't even know what that was. And I'll open up to anyone who wants to start.
Well, as I said earlier, I grew up in an environment where I knew opportunities were limited. I grew up before most of you on the panel did, but I knew that I would be limited by others versus limited by my ability. And therefore, I did not see myself certainly in a CEO position. There weren't any Black CEOs around. But I also said, I'm going to do the best that I can do. And I did, and I kept getting recognized. And, there's no formula. I don't think there's no playbook here. I think there are certain common elements. And I think you mentioned one of them, Nestor, and that is preparation. You're not going to get there if you're incompetent unless your relatives own the company. I mean, it's as simple as that. So you've got to be prepared. You've got to show that you have an ability to get the job done. And so people want to surround themselves with people who can get the job done. These are stressful environments. You have to persevere and handle the stress. Luck plays a huge part in this, being in the right place at the right time with the right people. But you also, I think, as a minority, have to be a bit thoughtful and a bit insightful, because you ask, why do our majority counterparts have this aspiration? It's been built into them. It's part of their tribal culture. It's not part of my tribal culture. And so you have to understand the culture of the other tribe. You'll never give up your identity. That's silly to say, but you can start to understand what are the important aspects of that culture. And if you're comfortable in practicing those aspects, you practice those aspects to get ahead. But again, I will stop now because I tend to talk much too much.
If I might, one of the things that for myself was I wasn't around anybody. I didn't grow up around that sort of environment where people were aspiring to something like that. We have to remember here from an historic standpoint that my mother's generation, federal policy was to move the Indians off the res, get them off the res, get that Indian out of them, for goodness sake, get them assimilated. And so, the idea was to get our people to get into trades. So we have a lot of welders, we have a lot of, folks that in carpentry and those kinds of things. But the whole idea was get that Indian out of them. So now I've got my mom who leaves Wisconsin and she meets my dad, and neither one of them are come from that sort of thing. And so, I don't see that. I grew up in East Central Indiana, Newcastle, Indiana, and nobody knows where that's at. It's near the end of the world. But the thing about that too is that even that, sort of middle class area, I call it Northern Kentucky. I just never was in an environment where I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of aspirant people. And so I think that's, it never occurred to me when I went to school. I graduated from Ball State University. Our only claim to fame, I think, is David Letterman. But I got a criminal justice degree, and basically got that degree just essentially because my dad kept pushing me, get a piece of paper. Okay, you figured when the time I graduated was 1990. and the economy was, a little rocky. And I was just lucky that, at that time, the casinos in Wisconsin were starting to, become more common, and the Ho-Chunk Nation was getting involved. And so my mom was a legislator at the time and urged me to come up, saying, we need educated people to come up. And so, even then it was just like, all right, a job, and then plus now I have a niche. I can fulfill a part of me because I want to help my people. And so that became my driving force. And that was my raison d'etre, right? Just to come back and help. And so that's my path. It really hasn't been, I didn't look at anything to say, yeah, I'm going to go towards that. Now, Ball State, I did take a few courses in sociology, and I knew then, I was taught that there are no people of color in corporate America's top spots. So I took that here to the nation too, and understood that, and come to become very, very familiar with the fact that we're a sovereign, and so this is our own corporate America. But I wanted to be a part of building it properly, so that we're not exclusive, but that we're inclusive, and making sure that the other folks, even the non or the white people who, there's a lot of scars for our people for the way we were treated, in this local area. And the idea was we got to rise above that, and we have to work together to create the best possible scenario that we can for our own success. So that really was something that was a driving force for me. And I didn't see anybody that looked like me until I got here.
Yeah, I'll share a little. So my experience in some ways has been different. So I was a kid of privilege. I was a doctor's kid, right? And I was a little bit different in the sense that my brother knew from the minute he could walk and talk that he wanted to be a physician like my dad, and he is. I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. So for me, it was about preserving my options, right? That includes by going to a college that would position me to go to do different things, whether it was business, medicine, law, et cetera. It was picking a major that would allow me some of those options. Even when I went into law school and ultimately made the decision to go back to grad school, this idea that I did both an MHA and an MBA, with the idea that, if the healthcare thing doesn't work out, if it turns out doctors hate my face and I need to try to continue to pay back loans, an MBA is something that would afford me options and the ability to continue to work and serve the community. So this idea that while I may not have known the specific path that I was going to tread, the idea around what are the things that will prepare me and give me flexibility and options has always kind of been a guiding principle. The other thing I would say that is a significant barrier specific to health administration, and I suspect to some other fields as well, is lack of knowledge about the career path, right? So for me, the thing that was a deciding factor was I had a friend of the family, a guy named Skip Reeder, who served as the CEO at Erlanger Health System in Tennessee. And when I was at a point where I was trying to find, I was going to go back to school and do something, I had Skip that I could reach out to. He went to an HBCU. He also had his law degree, and he was able to talk with me in a very real, personable way that I could identify with about what is it like to work with doctors and nurses in healthcare administration and serve, in nonprofit organizations in that way. And everyone doesn't have an Uncle Skip, right? So this idea that for those folks that are interested in serving, interested in growing personally and professionally, but just may not know what career options are out there. And then more importantly, what is the path that you have to tread in order to achieve some of those options? Like, I think that is one of the biggest barriers. It for sure is one that exists with what I do today, which is healthcare administration.
Awesome. And this is why I was excited about this, because we all lived it, and it's kind of how do we explain it to others, right? Because a couple of things that stood out from what you guys said. One is, Earl saying, hey, this, and Daniel saying the times, right? The times by itself held us back, right? For me, it was, hey, the lack of experience. I didn't have the mentorship. But I think, and you saying, hey, and Rick saying, I did have that, but it's keeping my options open. And my thought is always that, right? Working, doing your best because you want to do your best, keeping options open so you don't close doors in the future. So then the next step, or the next kind of caveat or question to follow that I would ask you guys would be, okay, you got my attention now. What is it to you that a C-suite person actually, like, what are their roles, right? Because oftentimes we see C-suites and we're like, big salaries, they're the bosses. But as we know, leadership comes with a whole lot of other responsibilities that not everyone is geared to do. And along those lines, what actual skills or educations or what technical stuff do we need to know to have that? Because I think oftentimes when we've seen it, or I've seen it myself, where it's like, hey, it's so competitive in those small circles, and you have to meet a certain bar, and race isn't going to get you there, right? Race is going to be an added value, but if you're not meeting that bar, then good luck trying to do it, or good luck if you don't understand what those roles are. You don't know what those skill sets that you need. So what would you guys say in terms of, for you, that CEO role, what is it? What the challenge, not challenge, and then what skill sets are you would say to the young person mid-career, hey, I need to get, or I need to have, if that makes sense? It's a loaded question. I told you.
It's a great question. And I've chosen a lot of C-suite executives in my time. And so, the question becomes, how does someone get to that level? How do you differentiate them? Because the pool from which you're going to choose is going to be filled with people who do their jobs well. They're going to be competent people. Mm-hmm. I think the people who will rise above that will be the people who understand, I'm not getting promoted to do my job. I have to do a different job, another job, a bigger job. And so people often get caught up in what I call an operational mentality. I'm just going to do something better and better and better and better. And these are the people who became the best buggy whip manufacturers in the age of the automobile, because they neglected to take a look at the future. So one has to have a strategic sense of your industry. There will be a class of people who I will want to run my operations and run the hell out of them and run them well. But those are not the people I necessarily want to plan the future with. I want some people who think holistically, who understand sociology, who understand interactions among people, who get along with people, who have great social skills to complement their great technical skills. And they're not here bullshitting. They're giving me substantive comments about the future instead of sitting in a meeting and demonstrating that you have an enviable grasp of the obvious, which, is just waste my time doing that. But it's a tough transition because you've been focused your entire career on doing the job you have, the best that you can do, and expecting that you're going to get promoted because of that. And that works up to a certain level. And that level is right at the C-suite. It's a requisite to be in the C-suite to do your job well, but you have to have more. You have to bring more than that to the job.
I think, for one thing, let me just, sort of start out my comments by just saying that, I feel like I'm in a, being a panelist here is it's a pleasure to hear you guys. It's educational. It's fascinating to me. This is really fun to be a part of this. I think about, what does it take to get to that spot? And again, I'll just share my own personal experience that it's never been an aspiration necessarily, but the aspiration is to make things better. I think, that C-suite, if I'm talking to a young person who's aspiring then, to achieve something greater than themselves, become, get into that, in that, rare air, if you will, is to have vision. To really understand the organization or what it is that you're intending to do. What are you trying to shape? Do you intend to leave a legacy? Are you courageous? Are you strategic? Are you not afraid to be surrounding yourself with people who are frankly smarter than you? I'm an expert at that. I have no problem starting myself. I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and I very much prefer to have brilliant people around me, and I seek that out. But I think there's one thing in my mind, and I can't speak to corporate America or any of the other corporations, but the necessity for courage. I think it's important to be very strategic and very purposeful in your decision-making process. You follow your vision, but you have to have the courage to make, some really hard, sometimes, decisions that will achieve your overall objective. And I think that's something that people really need to be thinking about, as they think about transitioning into that leadership. And the whole leadership piece, it's, Errol just mentioned it, it's relationships, it's people, something that I used to look at, even like, Rick mentioned LA Law, and you look at those people that were in those big high rises and you're just like, that's weird. They're not like me at all. I wonder what that's like. And then as you grow older and you meet some people in those positions, whether people, whatever, you're like, they do put their pants on the same way we do. It's not that big a thing, and it's okay to talk to them and it's okay to relate. And you'll find that, I find that just that kind of relationship, and building that kind of relation, just a rapport is invaluable to anybody's advancement, in what they seek to achieve. And so, I guess I'm very humbled by this. I don't refer to myself as being in a C-suite. Frankly, it's a very new term for me. And I think it's just, it's flattering, but I have a difficult time wearing that per se. But, and if I'm, trying to be somewhat instructive here, again, I guess the things I just mentioned are things that, I would take into consideration.
So I want to expand on something that Errol talked about, which is really this idea that to get to the C-suite, you're coming from somewhere, right? You're either coming from inside the organization or you're coming from outside the organization. And as you look at paths to leadership inside a particular organization, typically you're going to be a subject matter expert, right? You'll come up through the ranks in HR or finance or operations or IS. And so as you're looking at what it takes to rise to the level of leadership in a functional area inside a big organization versus what it takes to serve as a senior executive, a chief something or other, there are some distinguishing characteristics. There's some things that I have seen that are, I think, really helpful for you to have in order to make that transition. One of the things is that I wanted to expand on was emotional intelligence and people skills. So the things that make you a successful department leader don't necessarily translate to that more global set of responsibilities where you're no longer afforded the luxury of being an advocate for people, places, money, or stuff. What you have to be able to think globally, to make compromises, to make sacrifice. And so this idea that your strategic thinking, your perspective about the organization, it has to have shifted or be capable of shifting in order for you to make that transition to the C-suite. So the things that like the content expertise, I'm not a content expert in doggone near anything these days. And it feels like, the further I've progressed in my career, the harder it is for me to retain the minutia in all of the different areas of the enterprise. So the truth is that's really not my job, nor it should be. So you can't walk 3 feet in an academic health system without tripping over 15 smart people. And so they don't need me to be a content expert. It's how does the team function? Being able to identify what the real barriers are to success. When academic health systems don't achieve their goals, it is not because of a lack of smart. We have smart in abundance. It's things that are disruptive to team functioning. My ability to be able to identify those things, to support and remove barriers. So the stuff that helps me as a C-suite leader, it's different than the things that I think are key ingredients of success for people who get up to the director level in large corporations or large organizations.
That's awesome. And that's great information because it is, as I looked at myself in my transitioning, it was that where, you're the go-to person for a particular topic or a particular solution, but then you get thrown into, that higher leadership role where, oftentimes I get like, well, you used to go up to bat for us, or it used to be a simple yes, no. And as a new leader, I remember my first few years in C-suite, I was like, oh my God, this is a million. I can't just think in this one little space. Now it's the context of it all. And I will address that in two questions, in a few questions further. So hold those thoughts. The one now, I think that's just kind of, if I was listening, I'd be like, okay, so there's this big jump, right? There's this transition of two different roles. And if I were going to be honest, and probably you guys will agree, even though we mentor and even though we help people out, our roles take us away from that, right? It's usually when you're in the tail end of your career where then you then kind of energize to try to give back. But when you're in it, that's not necessarily in the moment. At least for me personally, I'll be honest, people will reach out to me, and the more I got higher up, the less I was available or had a bandwidth to try to mentor. So I knew that was a barrier. So the question then becomes, so how can, let's say, me or all of us, we're right there, we're knocking on the door. Who do we turn to? Who did you guys turn to? Or what strategies do you guys suggest so that we can, when we knock the door, we're going to knock it and be successful without, you guys can't say, just come talk to me as the CEO. I guess I'll put that as a challenge you guys to not say that.
Yeah, so two thoughts. So one, I think, is researching the career path for the area that you're interested in growing. And that looks different for the CFO of a Fortune 500 company, the Chief Human Resource Officer for a big pharmaceutical company, or with what I do as a healthcare administrator. So the typical career path, the educational requirements, preferred or optional experience, if you have an idea about where you want to end up, study the path of those that have gone before you, whether they are people of color or not. So familiarize yourself with the path. A second thing I would say is you have to develop support. And in some instances, you may be like me, you may have Uncle Skip that is in the industry that you can talk to, you can bounce ideas off of. You may not. And so what support looks like, it may be peers, it may be colleagues, it may be family, it may be all of the above. But this idea that no one gets to the C-suite without being turned down. I just have literally never heard of it. I can remember very distinctly the first 3 times I was passed over for a COO job. Right. So this idea that no one just steps into it, especially people of color. So you have to have enough resilience. You have to have enough of a support network and enough perseverance that you'll be able to understand the path and then walk the path.
I think it's an excellent point you made about being passed over. When you look at a major corporation, some of them have tens of thousands of people there. And are you going to have a rational expectation that, I'm the best of 10,000 or 30,000? And so, there's a real danger, I think, that when you are passed over, you immediately fall back to, well, I got passed over for inappropriate reasons. And, that could be the case, but it's not always the case. I have been in situations where, in retrospect, I wasn't good enough. And so I had to say, well, what do I have to do to get good enough? But the one thing that I did, and you're right, no one gets to the top without support, is you have to learn how to manage your boss. That's for sure. And you also have to keep pushing your boss if you have aspirations. What do you have to do? What do I have to do to get better? And I remember the first time my boss said, "Oh, well, you're doing great. You don't have to worry about a thing." I said, "Well, does that mean I'm ready for your job then?" And he gave me this shocked look and he said, no. I said, so what do I have to do to get ready for your job? I said, I don't want to replace you. I just assume you're going to move up, of course. And I want to know what I have to do to get ready for your job. And so they'll tell you when pushed what you need to do. And that is also another, I think, critical requirement. Demand evaluations, good, appropriate evaluations. Do not accept pablum. Do not accept you're doing fine, you're doing great, you're doing okay. I want to know exactly what I need to do to get better. Even if it is I'm being too much of a pain in the ass, I need to understand that as well. But you will not get better without getting good feedback from those above you. And if you're not getting it, you got to demand it. You really do. So let me move on. Let Dan,
Thanks, Errol. So, I'm not seeing a whole lot of relevance to my experience per se. Just for context purposes, I guess I would say that, when I arrived in 1993 to Ho-Chunk Gaming Wisconsin Dells, it was really kind of like this. It was an opportunity to do essentially whatever you wanted to do because there really wasn't a lot of structure. There was some structure, don't get me wrong, but there was opportunity to be extremely creative. And one of the things that I was notorious for is to shoot first and ask questions later. Again, as long as I thought it through and it made sense, it was going to be profitable, it was going to do something for the morale of the staff, whatever it was, I would just do it. But one of the things I did, and it's probably to Errol's point, is the whole managing the boss thing. I was so right in my mind that I found myself charging up the hill only to look back and see but a few people. So I think one of the things, maybe it's more relevant to folks that are maybe would manage a startup or something, is to be just be more mindful of that vision and of doing the right things, doing the right things for the right reasons. What is it you're seeking to achieve? Because in my case, when Nestor, when you asked about a mentor, zero. There was nothing here. My conscience and my morality and my humility just led me completely. And I wasn't always right. Made plenty of mistakes. And I think to that end. Is another, part of, relationships, and then with your own, your own subordinates, is the idea of mistakes aren't bad, unless they lose millions and millions. Mistakes are good. And, I tell my staff even today, it's like, think about it, calculate, talk to me, let's do it. If it's a failure, let's just dust ourselves off and let's do it. Let's try it a different way. But by God, we're going to succeed.
At one point, you did make, Dan, I thought was relevant to everyone, was that when you charged up the hill and you look back and didn't see a lot of people behind you. And I always say that, if you're out leading and no one's following, you just out for a walk in the woods. That's all there is. And so one of the skills that you have to have is selling your ideas and convincing people that they're worth following. And then, you treat your followers with respect and dignity, and you give them a lot of feedback as well, and they will follow you at that point.
And I think if you look at the comments in general too, that is when we talk about C-suite, where I mentioned it's a challenging journey where you guys have mentioned you do got to research what space you're in or what space you want to go to. And because if you're in a situation like Daniel, then it's that courage, it's the drive, it's I want to put myself out there and get people to follow me. But that opportunity lies there. And to be honest, just being as a business owner, I almost thought academics was easier because I knew, I knew which doors to knock. I then went to business and I have more headaches. I have more things because I'm alone and I have to create this. Versus when I'm at the hospital as a medical director, there's different challenges there. So it's kind of really knowing what space you're in and what the next step is and how to ask those questions in particularly. And you guys are right in terms of asking the right questions. because we're always going to feel, obviously, if we see ourselves as a good candidate, we always think we're ready. And if we do get passed by, it's like, well, do we understand completely what it is? Or why am I not ready? And why would I not I'll be ready next time? But if we don't ask those questions, it's funny that you mentioned that, Earl, because I remember first year residency, Dr. Grossman, if you guys know, he was a CEO, I believe, at the UW at that time. And on my first rotation, I asked him the same thing. Hey, how do I become you? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I want to be boss man. So he laughs. He's like, you know what? I've never been asked that. What kind of answer do you want? I don't want fluff. I want to know, like, is it education? What is it? He's like, well, that's a long discussion. But he kind of built a relationship of like, okay, these are the questions in my head that I truly have to ask to really get the answers. Otherwise, you're getting the work hard. You're doing well. And it's not going to cut it when it comes to that point where you're to the next step, right? And so in transitioning over to that, so now we're here. I mean, you guys have had and have some high positions where you can make decisions, right? And so we've been talking about the barriers from an individual to get to where they're at, but now, there's an underlying kind of criticism or speculation. They're like, hey, we make it, and then we're not helping back, right? And it's not easy of like, here you go, I want to recruit 20 minority people into my positions. What do you guys think are barriers as a C-suite type level to improve diversity? And then what did you guys do to try to break that or consistently keep that going? Because it can get lost in the shuffle, right? The reality of it is because you have so much to do. And I think till you've been in that level, you really don't understand, right? I remember before, I'm like, man, you're in there. Why don't you have 5 more? It's easy. And I bet you there's audience members that are like, come on, guys, Rick, you should have 10 people in there. Earl, come on, Daniel, it's me, I'm here. Hook me up. And that's not what we do. So can you guys speak to that?
Well, you ask great questions. Let me say that. And it gets also back to Dan's point about courage. White America believes this is a meritocracy. So anything you do that doesn't fit into the meritorious, dispassionate mode means that you're reversely discriminating. People of color never thought it was a meritocracy. And so, which is why you should act affirmatively through affirmative action. But the majority still controls most of the purse strings and most of the rules. And so you've got to find a way to try within a system that you know is not meritorious, but that the majority believes is meritorious, to try and get the results you want out of that, which is a tough do. There are a lot of mechanical things that you could do. You can, for example, make sure that every pool you have is a diverse pool. Don't bring me a pool of homogeneous candidates. I don't even want to look at it at that point. That's one thing I did, and it improved diversity right away. Shoot for getting a critical mass of people on your evaluation teams. That starts to make progress a little easier. I got to a point I did not have to have any special programs for women because I had enough women in the recruiting effort and in positions of authority where they would not allow women to be discriminated against. I never reached that in Wisconsin with people of color. I went recruiting in the South a lot, brought people of color up to Wisconsin, put them in positions like chief auditor. And after about 4 winters, they would say to me, I want to go back where it's a little warm. So it was a challenge for me, but we made some progress, but not as much as I would like. But the basic problem is it's not a meritocracy. The majority does not believe it's not a meritocracy. And so, your challenge is how do you get outcomes you want in a way that looks like a meritocracy, but it really isn't. Tough challenge.
So a couple things from my experience. So, I think about ways that I can impact the career path for folks who are trying to get into C-suite positions in healthcare administration. And there are kind of three different opportunities that I have. So one of them is for people who don't know a doggone thing about healthcare administration, are in college or at some stage of their educational development, and they're just trying to learn the path. And for those people, giving of my time, being willing to sit down and talk with any young person, participating in career days, take your kid to work days where I'm talking about the path that I walked. So the first area of opportunity to try to promote diversity and inclusion of people of color in what I do is actually before anybody gets into a hospital. The second thing that I can do is for people who are in some stage of that pipeline. So this may be interns or MHA students or MPH students, people who work in various middle management positions inside of health systems who are on the path already. How can I encourage them? How can I mentor them? And there are 4 or 5 folks that I work with right now that fall into that bucket. This idea then that I can be an Uncle Skip to someone else. So, I was fortunate to have that in my life. And part of what I think all of us can do as leaders is be that for someone else. The third thing is a lot more specific and a lot more granular, which is when I'm hiring leaders, when I'm hiring chief operating officers or CEOs, forcing the question of having a diverse candidate pool. Ultimately, hiring decisions that I have to make as a leader, I want to win. I want us to succeed. I want the organization to achieve its goals. And so I won't hire someone just because they were a person of color. But I can insist that we have qualified, strong applicants of color in the hunt for all of those positions. And that's something that's a lot more granular, a lot more specific, and something that I have an opportunity to try to do.
So in the nation, we have a thing that's called Ho-Chunk preference. And, it's a hiring preference issue. So once again, some of these things aren't entirely relevant. However, I would encourage folks to join local business organizations, economic development organizations. I'm a member of the executive member of MadRep here in town, and that's an economic development, a regional economic development organization. And one of the things that I can see I know that we do is to develop a pool. Because I think that's one of the issues that we have right now is the pool of candidates and trying to encourage the kids to get into school in the schools, the disadvantaged communities, and being there more active and getting them encouraged. Get into high school and get them interested in a career path. What are you thinking about doing? And get away from the thing of because they're a person of color, oh, you probably want to be a welder, or you probably want to be, but really get them thinking about a professional career path. And I'd say to any of those who are in a position of in a C-suite position, and there's opportunity to hire, people of color, is once again, and Errol and I have talked about, it's courage. I'm very proud of the fact that our newest CEO of MadRep is a Black man. Jason Fields is our new CEO, and I'm super proud of that. I was a significant part of the hiring process, and I can remember very distinctly, the discussions, which were great because we have a very progressive group of executive board members. But I can remember making the statement, while we were, deliberating, I said, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's make a statement in this community that one of the, the major nonprofits in this community will be a person of color. I'm very proud of that. And so I'd say to the folks, you get an opportunity, don't sit back, don't be a wallflower. Let's make the change. Let's have a community that talks about diversity and inclusion and equity. Let's have them put their money where their mouth is. So it's very important to be outspoken. And if one considers that courageous, then if it's important, then do it.
Nestor, with permission, I wanted to expound on something that Errol said earlier that I just want to elaborate on. So one thing I do worry about is individuals, especially men of color, getting good counsel about what they need to do to move to the next level. And I think about American Idol. And if anybody who's watched the TV show, in the early rounds, you've got folks with varying degrees of talent, is probably putting it mildly. So you got some folks that just can't sing. And I can remember very distinctly in season 1 of American Idol, my mother looking over and saying, didn't someone love him enough to tell him he couldn't sing? Like, isn't there someone that cared about him enough, this one particular contestant enough, to just tell him the truth? But what that assumes is that there's someone who knows you and cares enough to give you that good feedback that Errol was talking about. There are people who will tell you, who will give you feedback. And there are folks that have told me that I couldn't do what I'm doing right now. This idea then that there is a critical evaluation of who you seek that feedback from and who you accept it from, I think is incredibly important. And it hurts my heart to think of individuals who could be doing what I do today for sure, but for the influence of people who either were well-intended or not so well-intended, told them they couldn't do something. So good counsel, good feedback, someone you trust is critical.
And Rick, you must have been reading my mind, because that was the next step in terms of it. Because, I even looked at it, an example I give in medicine when I tell the residents, I think of myself as a cool guy in residence, like, hey, I want to be like him. And I might be blowing smoke up my butt, but I think of myself that way. But I would tell them, they would go on rotations, for example, and they wouldn't like a certain profession because of the one person they met, or the one resident that was above them, or the one attending. And similar to corporate America, the one interaction with the CEO. And I would tell them, hey, you have to look at it in totality and then look and reevaluate. Now, if you're getting the same advice from multiple different trusted services, then there's something to be said there. But understanding the system, that one, it is a small circle, and you are going after someone's job, right? So they're not nilly-willy going to be like, hey, here you go, here's the pathway to take over my job, because they might just get there, they might just start it, or they're going through their own inner struggle. So it is important to look at, okay, what is that critical, and how do you evaluate that, and teaching it for more people. So I guess, what would you say what are recommendations you would say in terms of that, as far as like the advice, and how do you vet that? Hopefully when you're at that position, right, you have enough experience to do that. But I think early on, when we were talking, where Daniel was talking about, Rick, what would you tell him to my young me, where if I crossed those people at the wrong time early on, I'd be like, I can't do it, right? For us now, if someone tells us we can't, we know, sure, I'll prove it to you, but not necessarily back in the day.
And the key factors that I think are important for, all right, what is a credible source for that type of feedback around where I need to grow, what I need to work on? One, they need to know enough about me to have an informed opinion, right? So someone who interviewed me for 15 minutes in passing doesn't necessarily have that insight to give real valuable critique around what I need to work on to grow. A second thing is they really need to know the industry and the business and the path, right? So this is someone ideally that has either done it themselves or seen it done enough times that they are a credible source of insight and feedback around what the differentiators are for success. So those two things, they need to know enough about me to be able to speak intelligently and know, quite frankly, what I need to work on. They also need to know enough about the industry. And the third thing I would say is they also need to not have any observable bias, right? So there are folks who, for their own reasons, might share their opinion about where you need to be that have nothing to do with you, your aptitude, your abilities, or your actual propensity to succeed. So no observable bias. They need to know enough about the industry, and they need to know enough about you.
And that's true, because oftentimes with conference, I tell people, hey, reach out to me. And early on, when I see people make a mistake, is when they reach out to me. One, they don't come prepared, or two, they're like, just help me or give me advice. I'm like, sure, work hard, right? Like that doesn't, I can't guide you with that, because I don't know. It's kind of the social media effect, right? You're on there and it's like, I want to lose weight. Okay, do all this. And no one asks, wait a minute, do you have food? Do you work out? Do you have medical problems, right? It's kind of putting that into context for it. And there was a question from the audience, and I think it relates to you, Rick, because it's in healthcare administration. So any advice to someone that's exploring a transition from an academic position to healthcare administration and hopefully join C-suite? Is there any particular advice that you would give that individual?
I mean, without knowing more specifics about where the person who's asking the question is, the things I would say, for people who rise to the C-suite in academic health systems, I've noticed they tend to come from two different areas. One is folks like yourself, Nestor, who have a clinical background. They're a physician, they're a nurse, they're a therapist, and then they get a master's degree and work their way up through the ranks. So clinical background plus an appropriate master's degree is kind of one approach. The second is the path that I travel, which is getting an MHA from one of the universities that tends to produce fellows and residents in big healthcare systems. So UAB is one of those places. My observation then would be, figure out how closely you align with one of the two more popular paths. It's not that you can't rise to the C-suite in healthcare via another route, but those tend to be the two most popular. I think if you look at SSM locally with Damon Boatwright, Damon was an MHA from the Medical University of South Carolina. Damon and I traveled the same path. If you look at UW Health with folks like Pete Newcomer, Alan Kaplan, others, this idea that people who end up in those routes, I know some of the leadership down the road at Freighter, MHA from the University of Michigan. So the idea that there are some common paths, common steps in those backgrounds, figure out where you line up, and then develop an idea about what you need to do to get on the path.
Right. And one thing I would mention in terms of along those lines too, and I think all of you guys will attest to, is obviously times change, right? So even in academic medicine, I remember a time, and it precedes me, I was kind of at the cusp where those CEOs were all from education backgrounds. And now it's become more administrative, business-like. And you can see that in education too, where because the roles of what people take and the challenges that exist within organizations continuously change. So it's that keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with that knowledge, because what was a path 20 years ago might not be the path that is needed now, nor the skill set. So we have the last few minutes here, and I know that I don't want the Grammy music to start on me here, especially since we're virtual, but I do want to thank you guys for being on here. I mean, we could talk for hours, and honestly, hopefully the audience got, because these are the type of interactions, not only because you guys are C-suites, it's also men of color, right? I think you guys have accomplished great things just being in C-suite, but then it's an extra bonus, for example, being a man of color. And I think people hearing us, seeing us, doing all that stuff is important to know, because like we all said, we all started with I don't know, maybe I knew, but these are the type of things that I think hopefully will inspire people. I'm a big Tupac fan, so we might have changed the world, but we'll inspire people that do it. So I thank you guys. If you guys want to give any last comments or anything, let me know.
Nestor, thank you so much. I just want to say it's great to meet you, Errol. Great to meet you, Rick. But I just, as a final sort of thing, I'd like for Nestor, I'm going to put you on the panel because I'm going to belt out a tune. I'm going to see how much you guys love me. I'm just kidding. So, hey, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun. You guys are fascinating and inspiring, and just thank you so much, guys.
I will echo that. Thank you. This has been a fun panel, but I always keep telling people, remember, advice is worth what you paid for it.
Likewise, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Dan, I love you enough to tell you to don't sing. Don't sing, man. Just don't do it.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
This is 365 Media.